Welcome to Night 6 to fall asleep fast. This is a quiet place where you don't need to focus, remember, or do anything at all. You can simply listen or let the sound fade gently into the background. If it feels right, you can softly like this video now or leave a calm comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is. There's no need to rush. Everything here moves slowly. Tonight, we explore sleepwalking through history, famous figures and their nocturnal journeys. A calm and unhurried story from the past, told gently, without urgency, and without expectation. You don't need to stay awake for it. You don't need to follow every detail. If you were here last night, welcome back. And if this is your first night, you can begin right here, exactly as you are. A new night will be waiting for you again tomorrow. But for now, allow your breathing to slow, your thoughts to drift, and let this story quietly carry you toward rest. As the quiet invitation of the night settles, the world that remains is one shaped by darkness that once belonged fully to itself. Long before artificial glow pressed back the edges of evening, night arrived with a certainty that required no announcement. It moved across the land slowly, dimming fields, softening stone, and lowering its weight over towns and countryside alike. When it came, it stayed, and everything beneath it learned to exist in reduced light. Streets emptied not because they were ordered to, but because there was little reason to remain. Footsteps thinned until they vanished, and doors closed with an unhurried finality. Windows darkened one by one, leaving only the faintest hints of life behind shutters and glass. The air cooled, carrying with it the lingering warmth of the day, now dissipating into stillness. Sound traveled differently then, softened and absorbed by night itself. In these hours, the world was not inactive, only quieter. Time felt broader, less divided, stretching gently rather than being measured. Without clocks demanding attention, the night allowed moments to expand. A single candle could define an entire room, its flame enough to shape shadows that moved slowly along the walls. Outside, moonlight rested on rooftops and paths, illuminating just enough to reveal form without detail. This was a night that did not rush. It did not push forward or pull backward. It simply existed, offering a long interval between one day and the next. People surrendered to it naturally, not as an act of discipline, but as a rhythm learned early and followed without question. Sleep arrived in layers, sometimes deep and complete, sometimes light and interrupted, but always held within the same extended darkness. The buildings themselves seemed to respond to this certainty. Stone walls released the heat they had gathered, wood creaked softly as it cooled, and floors settled into silence. Even large cities, when viewed from a distance, appeared almost fragile under the night sky. Their outlines softened, their presence reduced to clusters of shadow and faint reflection. From above, there was little movement to suggest the complexity of lives contained within. Beyond the towns, the countryside lay open and still. Fields stretched into darkness, their boundaries known more by memory than sight. Trees stood unmoving, their leaves barely stirring unless a breeze passed through. Paths that carried travelers by day rested unused, marked only by pale moonlight or the occasional glimmer of dew. The night did not conceal these places. It held them gently, allowing them to pause. In such a world, darkness was not an absence but a condition. It shaped behavior without force, encouraging stillness simply by existing. Tasks that required clarity waited for daylight. Thoughts softened, drifting without urgency. The mind followed the environment, slowing its pace to match the long hours ahead. There was nothing to be missed, nothing pressing beyond what the night permitted. Within homes, routines unfolded quietly. Lamps were lowered, embers banked, fabrics arranged with care. These gestures were small, repeated nightly, and rarely thought about. They were part of the transition, signals to the body that the outer world had receded. Even those who did not sleep immediately felt the change, their movements growing slower, their attention turning inward. The night allowed for pauses that daylight could not sustain. It offered a space where actions were minimal and intentions softened. One could sit without purpose, stand without destination, or rest without expectation. The darkness did not demand explanation or productivity. It simply remained wide and forgiving. Above it all, the sky stretched uninterrupted. Stars were not decoration but presence, fixed points in a vast field of dark. Clouds passed slowly, reshaping the patterns without hurry. The moon, when visible, cast a calm authority over the land, its light steady and cool. These were not spectacles to be admired briefly, but companions through long hours. As the night deepened, distinctions blurred further. The line between waking and sleeping softened, becoming less defined. Thoughts drifted without conclusion, images appearing and fading without needing to settle. The world, reduced to its quieter forms, invited this same loosening. Nothing required sharp focus. Nothing needed to be held tightly. It was within this kind of night that countless lives unfolded their unseen hours. Not in moments of significance or record, but in the simple continuation of existence under reduced light. The night did not ask who these people were or what they had done. It offered the same stillness to all without distinction. And as the darkness held steady, as the streets remained empty and the rooms dim, the night continued to make space. Space for rest, for wandering thoughts, for movements that did not need to be noticed. It lingered there, unclaimed and patient, allowing whatever might quietly happen within it to do so without interruption. The space the night made did not remain empty for long. Within it, rooms held their own quiet attention, neither fully awake nor fully surrendered to sleep. These interiors existed in a state between, shaped by low light and long hours, waiting without anticipation. Walls absorbed the hush, floors rested beneath the weight of stillness, and ceilings seemed to lower slightly as the night deepened. In many houses, one room remained gently active after the others had settled. It might be a chamber near the hearth, where embers continued to glow long after flames had died down. The air there was warmer, carrying the faint scent of smoke and ash, mingled with the softer smells of wood and fabric. Light was not absent, only restrained, offered by a candle or oil lamp turned low enough to soften its reach. Shadows gathered along the edges of these rooms, settling into corners and beneath furniture. They did not move quickly, only shifting when the flame wavered or a draft passed unnoticed. The shapes they formed were familiar, repeated night after night, until they became part of the room's memory. Nothing startled within these walls. Everything moved slowly, if it moved at all. Bedrooms, too, held their own quiet watchfulness. Beds were prepared not as invitations to immediate sleep, but as places to return to when the body decided it was time. Blankets lay folded with care, linens smoothed by habit rather than urgency. A chair might hold clothing set aside earlier, its outline softened by dim light. These objects waited patiently, without expectation. In larger houses, corridors stretched between rooms like calm channels, guiding the night inward. Their length was emphasized by darkness, their far ends dissolving into shadow. Doors stood closed or slightly ajar, their thresholds marking transitions from one still space to another. The air here was cooler, less disturbed, and carried sound only reluctantly. A single footstep would have traveled far, though none were needed to make the space feel alive. Windows played a quiet role in these rooms. Covered or uncovered, they allowed the night to enter gently, filtering moonlight or starlight into pale shapes on the floor. Outside, the world remained present but distant, its movements slowed to match the interior calm. The occasional rustle of leaves or shift of air passed through without drawing attention. In places of learning or devotion, rooms took on a different stillness. Libraries, studies, and small chapels rested in darkness punctuated by the faintest light. Shelves of books stood unread, their contents untouched for hours, their bindings absorbing the quiet. Desks held papers left where hands had last set them down, their surfaces catching the soft glow of a candle burned low. These rooms did not insist on use. They existed to be occupied or left alone, equally content in either state. The night did not change their purpose, only their tone. By day, they served function and order. By night, they held atmosphere, allowing space for the mind to loosen its grip on structure. In modest homes, the boundaries between rooms blurred. One space served many roles, shifting gently as the day receded. A table that held meals earlier now rested bare. A bench near the wall became a place to sit briefly before lying down. The simplicity of these interiors made them especially attuned to the night. Every sound was noticeable, every shadow familiar. Still, even here, nothing demanded attention. The night softened edges and reduced contrast, making the ordinary feel distant and calm. Objects lost their sharpness, becoming silhouettes rather than tools. The mind, mirroring this change, began to drift without effort, thoughts moving slowly, unanchored from tasks left undone. Some rooms held signs of recent activity, subtle and fading. A cup left near a chair, its contents long cooled. A book opened to a page unread for some time. A candle shortened by hours of quiet burning. These traces did not interrupt the stillness. They belonged to it, markers of time passing gently rather than being measured. The architecture itself seemed to breathe differently at night, would contracted slightly, releasing small, familiar sounds. Stone walls held the cool more deeply. Roof beams settled under their own weight. These were not disturbances but rhythms, reminders that even in rest, structures continued their slow work of existing. In grander residences, the effect was magnified by scale. Large rooms felt even larger in darkness, their boundaries softened by shadow. Tapestries faded into indistinct textures. Furniture became islands in a sea of dimness. The quiet here was expansive, spreading across polished floors and high ceilings, unbroken by human presence. Yet even in such spaces, the night did not feel empty, felt held. The rooms remembered their daytime lives without reenacting them. They carried impressions rather than actions, allowing the weight of history to rest lightly within them. Nothing pressed forward, nothing retreated. Everything remained suspended in a gentle pause. As the hours moved on, these rooms stayed alert in their own way, not watchful but receptive, ready to contain whatever small movements might occur within them. A shift of fabric, the lowering of a flame, the settling of a body onto a chair. The night allowed these moments without emphasis, folding them into the larger quiet. The longer the darkness lasted, the more the distinction between room and night faded. Interiors felt less enclosed, more like extensions of the outside stillness. Walls no longer separated as firmly. They simply outlined areas of rest. The air moved freely, carrying the same calm from one space to another. It was within rooms like these that the night found its most intimate expression. Not in streets or fields, but in the places where people withdrew, where awareness softened and attention loosened. These spaces did not insist on sleep, but they prepared for it patiently, offering comfort without instruction. And as the night continued to hold its slow course, as the rooms remained half-lit and half-dreaming, there was a sense that stillness itself was not complete. It waited quietly, making room for something subtle to pass through, something gentle enough not to disturb the calm that had settled so deeply. From the quiet interiors, movement began to take shape in a way that was almost imperceptible. Limbs stretched, feet shifted softly, and bodies adjusted themselves without urgency. It was a movement that did not require thought, a gentle continuation of being, carried out almost automatically. The rooms, steeped in their own stillness, welcomed these motions, accommodating them with subtle creaks of wood or soft drafts that passed through open windows. Steps traced familiar paths through hallways, over rugs, and along polished floors. The motion was slow, deliberate only in the sense that it respected the space it passed through. Doors were crossed with care, not from caution, but because they were simply part of the journey. A hand might touch a wall to steady itself, fingertips brushing smooth plaster or rough timber, feeling the textures of a room that existed more in memory than in conscious attention. Light continued to play a quiet role in these wanderings. Candle flames flickered low, their glow casting elongated shadows that moved alongside the wandering figures. Moonlight, streaming through narrow windows, drew paths across floors and walls, marking the progress of each step without hurry. In this interplay of shadow and illumination, movement seemed to merge with the night itself, neither dominating nor drawing notice, merely existing as a soft rhythm. The hallways carried the sound of these nocturnal motions in muted whispers. Footfalls were absorbed by thick rugs or softened by the uneven stone beneath them. Occasionally, a floorboard sighed with familiar stress, or a hinge murmured when a door shifted slightly. These noises were not startling but integral, a gentle accompaniment that affirmed the presence of life without demanding attention. The spaces themselves seemed aware, ready to hold the quiet ritual of bodies moving while minds rested. Even in the largest houses, where rooms stretched far and ceilings arched high, the effect was the same. Movement became part of the architecture. Each corridor, staircase, and landing participated in the still choreography of the night. The ceilings echoed faintly with each careful step, while shadows traveled along walls, flickering with the soft sway of candlelight. The building seemed to breathe along with its inhabitants, expanding and contracting with each subtle motion. In the smaller, simpler homes, the sensation was more intimate but no less deliberate. Steps from bed to hearth, from chair to window, left faint impressions in the quiet. A hand smoothing a blanket, a gentle adjustment of a pillow, a pause by the doorway, each act unhurried and continuous with the room's own tempo. Here, the world outside the walls felt distant, its presence minimal, leaving the house to its own nocturnal rhythm. The figures that moved through these spaces were not distinct in identity, yet each carried traces of habit. The patterns of their movement were familiar, repeated night after night. A footstep followed another in precise, unremarkable cadence. Hands rested momentarily on surfaces that offered reassurance. The motions were neither purposeful nor restless, only extensions of the body's own subtle needs. Even those who were awake were not awake in the sense of observation. Their attention drifted in tandem with the muted progression of the night. In corridors that connected rooms, the air shifted gently. The movement of a body displaced it only slightly, carrying warmth and faint scents from one space to the next. Fabrics hung in their customary places, curtains swayed minutely, and the wooden floors transmitted soft vibrations that the mind scarcely noticed. Time, in these moments, seemed suspended, measured less by the passing hours than by the uninterrupted flow of subtle motion. The nocturnal wanderings extended into spaces meant for work or reflection. In a study or library, steps traced paths between shelves, fingertips grazing the spines of books without intent to remove them. Light from a low candle fell upon open pages, illuminating fragments of text that were absorbed in passing rather than read. Each movement was part of the night's rhythm, silent but not absent, integrating human presence with the stillness of the environment. Even staircases, often the busiest parts of a home by day, became zones of gentle negotiation. Feet shifted carefully, finding balance without thought. Handrails offered subtle guidance. Shadows climbed with the steps, stretching and shrinking as light flickered across worn surfaces. The architecture held these motions with patience, and the night itself seemed to extend its quiet encouragement. The figures did not walk for accomplishment or exploration. They moved because their bodies, even in partial sleep or light consciousness, found comfort in motion. It was a dance without choreography, a passage through familiar spaces where every gesture had been performed countless times before. The rooms knew these movements, carrying them with familiarity, allowing them to pass without disturbance. Through open doorways, moonlight traced the wandering paths. Silvery beams stretched across floors and walls, brushing over rugs and wooden panels, over tables and low cabinets. Shadows mirrored the steps of those moving silently, companions that lengthened and shortened without thought. The entire scene was a careful balance of light, movement, and stillness, each element coexisting in quiet accord. Even the smallest details contributed to this nocturnal ballet. A flickering candle, a half-open shutter, the gentle shifting of a floorboard. Each subtle mark was absorbed into the larger calm. The eye and the ear, if one attended to them at all, encountered nothing abrupt, nothing demanding notice. The night held every motion in soft suspension, a continuum that could be followed, or simply left as background for drifting thought. Outside the walls, the quiet streets and distant fields mirrored the interior's unhurried activity. The world beyond was not empty, but it was slowed to match the deliberate pace indoors. Trees swayed softly in the night air, their leaves brushing lightly against one another. A distant waterway might murmur without urgency. Even from inside, the senses could detect the subtle pulse of a broader nocturnal world, harmonizing with the measured steps within. Through all of this, there was no narrative urgency, no need to note who moved where or why. Movement itself was enough. The night carried the rest of the story, unspoken and unmeasured. Each gesture, each passage through shadow and light, contributed to a seamless continuum in which the world remained calm, familiar, and accepting of the slow, unrecorded progress of living bodies. As the hours stretched on, the motion persisted with quiet patience. Limbs, steps, and hands followed routines shaped by habit and environment. There was a rhythm, yet it was one that required no attention, no thought, no intention beyond its own unfolding. The night enveloped all of it, holding movement and stillness alike with gentle impartiality. And so the night continued, bodies tracing familiar patterns through dimly lit rooms, corridors, and staircases, flowing without interruption, carried along by an invisible current that asked nothing of them beyond presence. The quiet steps, the soft brushing of hands against surfaces, the subtle adjustment of posture. These became part of the night itself, as natural as the cool air that drifted through windows and the soft glow that lingered on polished floors. The movement of bodies through the quiet corridors gradually began to take on a faint sense of familiarity, not as names or stories, but as the impressions of life itself unfolding in hours seldom observed. Each footstep, each subtle adjustment, suggested the presence of people whose identities were less important than the gentle rhythm they contributed to the night. Rooms and hallways carried the traces of these lives, holding them without judgment, allowing a seamless flow of nocturnal passage. It was in these soft, unseen hours that the essence of familiar lives lingered, quietly bridging past and present in a way that only the night could afford. In the expansive chambers of older residences, the faint outline of figures moving could be perceived without precise detail. A hand rested on a balustrade, a robe shifted as one passed through, the faint scrape of a chair echoing through the high ceilings. Yet none of these movements demanded attention. They were simply part of the larger pulse of the house, absorbed into its stillness. The walls remembered the repeated gestures, the low sounds, and the gentle cadence of passage, storing them as subtle layers of history that were not written down, but experienced. These nocturnal hours softened the boundaries between one room and the next. Passageways became gentle connectors, guiding motion without insistence. Light, filtered through narrow windows or reflected off polished surfaces, marked the way with a steady calm, illuminating surfaces without casting harsh shadows. The figures moved almost in dialogue with the space, adjusting to its constraints, bending their routines to the contours of walls, stairs, and doorways. The night itself seemed to extend its patience, allowing each motion to occur without interruption or hurry. Even when a figure paused briefly, it was as if the night had called for reflection without intention. A hand lingering over a shelf, fingertips brushing over books or ledgers, a momentary pause at a doorway. These were not acts of curiosity, but quiet acknowledgments of presence. The air in these rooms was cool, carrying faint scents of wood, wax, and cloth, each layer layering itself gently over the previous day. Nothing intruded, nothing demanded, and yet the subtle motion continued, an unbroken thread connecting spaces and times. In spaces devoted to study or contemplation, the nocturnal wanderers traced paths without leaving signs beyond the lightest touch. Shelves held their weight without complaint, the faint warmth of a lamp softened by distance. Every movement was absorbed into the texture of the room, merging with the dim glow of candlelight and the quiet reflections of the night. The pattern was consistent yet unremarkable, repetition without emphasis, forming an understated choreography that the walls held in quiet memory. Beyond the immediate confines of a house, the night extended its reach, connecting familiar interiors to wider gardens, courtyards, and open spaces. Figures moved slowly through these transitional areas, their motions deliberate but unhurried. Moonlight rested on pathways and carefully tended flora, revealing shapes without sharpness, casting shadows that elongated and receded with the soft sway of trees. A gentle wind carried the scent of flowers and soil, threading the world inside with the world outside, harmonizing movement with stillness. In grand estates, corridors and arcades acted as subtle guides, leading the wanderer through a sequence of spaces without clear distinction. Archways framed fleeting glimpses of rooms beyond, each lit by its own muted glow. Tapestries swayed faintly with the passing air, their surfaces absorbing light and echoing motion without contrast. Every step was both movement and observation, a blending of human presence with the silent patience of architecture. The night did not separate the wanderer from the building. It allowed them to exist as one quiet current flowing through space. Smaller houses, by contrast, offered a more intimate rhythm. Steps crossed short distances with measured ease, furniture became companions rather than obstacles, and shadows crept lightly along walls in soft patterns. Even the most modest objects, the folded cloth on a bench, the cooling embers of a small hearth, the gentle ripple of curtains, participated in the continuity of the night. Movement did not disrupt. It complemented, weaving seamlessly into the calm fabric that rested over floors and surfaces alike. Time during these hours felt different, not measured by the hour or by expectation, but by subtle changes in light and sound. The soft flicker of a candle, the lengthening of a shadow along a corridor, the distant rustle of leaves outside, all marked the passage of moments without urgency. The wanderer's steps echoed this unhurried pace, each gesture a quiet extension of the night itself. There was no need to track, no need to recall. Presence was sufficient. Even the air seemed aware of the unspoken choreography. It carried warmth from rooms that had retained it, cooled in spaces that had settled, and flowed through corridors in gentle currents. Each breath, each motion, mingled with these subtle movements, reinforcing the impression that life continued not through grand acts but through the accumulation of the smallest gestures. The night held these details patiently, neither revealing nor concealing, allowing them to exist in their quiet fullness. As the hours deepened, light and shadow danced more subtly. Candle flames warped gently in their own glow, casting soft, trembling shapes on the surfaces they touched. Moonlight filtered through latticed windows, outlining the wandering figures without claiming them. Every movement was absorbed into the ambient calm, echoing softly yet never imposing, creating an environment in which the body could continue its habitual motions with complete acceptance. In this space, familiar lives were not defined by who they were or what they had done, but by the gentle continuity of being. The night provided a canvas on which their presence could be noted without emphasis, a quiet framework for existence that was more sensation than thought. Every step, every adjustment, every pause became part of a larger rhythm that enveloped both the living and the spaces they inhabited. The continuity of night, of rooms, of movement, held each within the same calm embrace. Even as some wanderers passed near windows, the exterior world remained distant and patient. Gardens, streets, and fields stretched into darkness, reflecting the soft cadence inside. The night connected all these places in a shared stillness, extending the subtle motions outward without altering them. Movement, when observed in this broader context, became less about individual action and more about participation in the gentle unfolding of nocturnal life. The halls, rooms, and courtyards together formed an uninterrupted channel, guiding motion without imposing direction. There was no hurry, no final goal, no expectation of arrival. Each step passed into the next, the body carrying itself in a flow that merged seamlessly with the night. Even when stillness intervened, it felt like part of the same continuum, a pause in motion that was no less meaningful for its quietness. Shadows and light continued to shape the environment softly. Candlelight pooled across worn rugs, moonlight traced pale rectangles across floorboards, and the faint shapes of furniture emerged and receded without insistence. The interplay was subtle, almost imperceptible, a gentle framing for movement that neither demanded attention nor allowed it to dominate. In such a setting, wandering became an act of being itself, and the night embraced it fully. As the night deepened, the quiet cadence of familiar lives moving through unseen hours continued to unfold. Rooms, corridors, and outdoor passages held each motion without judgment, absorbing it into their steady presence. Each gesture, each careful step, became part of an unbroken, patient rhythm, flowing onward without direction, without end, and without need for recognition. The subtle choreography of living bodies, quietly carried along by the night, became inseparable from the spaces themselves, and the calm continued to expand outward. As the soft rhythm of movement and stillness continued, the night began to stretch beyond the walls of the houses, reaching into the quieter corners of gardens, courtyards, and the open land that lay beyond. The spaces between buildings were not empty, but held in a gentle suspension, each shadow and faint rustle absorbed into the calm. Paths, once trodden during the day with purpose, now lay muted and wide, waiting for those who moved slowly through them, their steps almost imperceptible against the soft earth or worn stones. The night held these passages as naturally as it held rooms, allowing every movement to exist without hurry or expectation. Trees along garden paths swayed with a gentle motion, their leaves brushing against one another in a quiet conversation carried only by the soft breeze. The moonlight filtered through the branches, tracing delicate patterns across hedges, walls, and benches. Flowers released faint scents that mingled with the cool night air, subtle and almost imperceptible, yet enough to add depth to the stillness that hung over every path and courtyard. Even the smallest stones and blades of grass seemed aware of the quiet, holding their place in the larger tapestry of nocturnal calm. Figures moving between these spaces did so with the same slow deliberation as within the houses, as if each step were measured by the night itself rather than by conscious thought. Hands occasionally reached out to steady against a tree trunk or the edge of a railing, brushing against bark or wood with a gentleness that reflected the surrounding calm. Shadows from these figures stretched long and softened over paths, merging with the ambient darkness in ways that obscured distinct form but preserved presence. The rhythm of movement continued unbroken, blending seamlessly with the environment. The quiet of the night extended to the more distant surroundings, where fields and open land absorbed the softest motions. Grass and low vegetation bent under the faintest touch of wind or passing feet. Water in nearby streams moved with unhurried patience, reflecting pale moonlight in slow, rippling patterns. There was no need to mark or measure these moments. They existed simply, flowing alongside the steps of those who moved within them, harmonizing the human rhythm with that of the broader landscape. Walls, fences, and garden structures became part of this nocturnal choreography, guiding movement without imposing constraints. Low hedges marked boundaries softly, gateposts offered gentle points of reference, and stone pathways carried footsteps with muted consistency. Every feature was absorbed into the calm, contributing to the quiet order of the night. The world beyond the buildings was neither untamed nor silent. It simply continued in the same unhurried cadence, a mirror to the interior's gentle pace. Along these pathways, the interaction of light and shadow continued its quiet interplay. Moonlight pooled on stones and leaf surfaces, tracing shapes that were familiar yet ever-changing as the night moved on. Shadows lengthened and shortened subtly, following the slow progress of wandering figures. Even the faint glow of distant lamps or fires in neighboring dwellings softened the contrast, blending into the ambient darkness, and reinforcing the impression that movement and stillness were parts of a single, continuous presence. In courtyards, small architectural details, the curve of a fountain, the edges of a low wall, the worn stone of steps, added texture to the passage of night. Water lapped gently against stone basins, catching faint light in ripples that drifted outward and dissolved into shadow. The surfaces of stone and wood retained the faint warmth of day, gradually releasing it into the cooler night. Every texture, every sound, every scent contributed subtly, reinforcing a sense of calm continuity across spaces that were otherwise unremarkable in daylight. Figures moving in these areas often paused without reason, lingering near benches, low walls, or garden arches. Hands brushed lightly against surfaces, eyes, if open at all, traced the outlines of shadows. These pauses were not purposeful or reflective in the usual sense. They were extensions of the body's natural rhythm, responses to the environment rather than intentional acts. The night absorbed these motions, holding them in balance with the surrounding calm, neither amplifying nor diminishing them. Paths leading to gates, courtyards, or the edges of gardens gradually became less defined, blending into the darkened surroundings. The transitions were subtle, marked by shifts in light, texture, and sound rather than by abrupt boundaries. Wandering continued with ease, moving from cultivated spaces to wilder edges, where grass and earth yielded softly underfoot. The moon cast pale shapes over these expanses, creating a steady, guiding presence without emphasis, allowing movement to be both free and contained. Even the faintest sounds, rustling leaves, distant water, or the muted scrape of a footstep, seemed amplified by the surrounding stillness, though never startling. Each contributed to the overall cadence of the night, a quiet metronome that marked time without insistence. The spaces between sounds were as important as the sounds themselves, offering moments of pause, reflection, or gentle anticipation that required no conscious attention. Trees, bushes, and other vegetation acted as both guide and companion. Branches extended overhead, creating soft tunnels of shadow and light. Leaves swayed gently, responding to subtle air currents, echoing the slow motion of bodies passing beneath them. Flowers remained open to the night, their petals absorbing the cool air, their fragrance mingling with soil and stone. All elements combined to form an environment that was responsive yet unobtrusive, allowing movement to flow naturally without interference. Figures moving along these routes did so without urgency, their gestures small and deliberate. Hands occasionally adjusted clothing, brushed against surfaces, or trailed along walls or hedges. Feet followed familiar paths with minimal attention, relying on habit rather than sight. Every step was absorbed into the larger rhythm of the night, merging with the patterns of light, shadow, and scent that filled the open spaces. The continuity of these movements, from interiors to courtyards and paths beyond, created an unbroken flow of nocturnal life. Even as the world expanded outward, from the intimacy of rooms to the openness of gardens and streets, the same gentle cadence persisted. No distinction was drawn between spaces. The night enveloped all with equal calm, holding movement and stillness in balance, and allowing each to exist without drawing attention or judgment. Moonlight continued to trace subtle paths across these expanses, illuminating stones, grass, and water with soft, steady consistency. Shadows moved alongside wandering figures, never sharp, always blending. The air carried warmth from buildings and the faint sense of vegetation and earth, interweaving the human presence with the environment. Motion and stillness, light and shadow, warmth and coolness, all combined to form a quiet, immersive rhythm that extended without end across the night. In this way, the world outside the buildings became a natural continuation of the interior's calm. The gentle wandering through gardens, paths, and courtyards offered continuity and connection, extending the unhurried progression of movement through still spaces. Each step, each pause, each soft gesture of the body merged into the larger cadence of the night, allowing life to continue unobserved, unmeasured, and uninterrupted. The night continued to unfold as the wandering bodies and quiet spaces merged into a gentle, continuous rhythm. The paths through gardens and courtyards led naturally toward areas of stiller reflection, where fountains, low walls, and hidden alcoves offered pauses without insistence. Water trickled softly in shallow basins, catching the faint light of moon and distant candles, each ripple spreading slowly outward before dissolving into the calm. The gentle sound mingled with the rustle of leaves and the soft tread of feet, forming a seamless chorus of movement and quiet, present without ever demanding notice. Within these smaller spaces, subtle details caught the eye without calling attention. Moss had grown over stones along shaded paths, softening edges, while petals from night-blooming flowers lay scattered on the ground, slightly damp with dew. Shadows of trees and shrubs swayed gently across walls and walkways, stretching long and dissolving into one another as the moon shifted higher in the sky. The wind, if it stirred at all, moved lazily, brushing through foliage and carrying faint scents that layered over the warmth of earth and stone. Every element of the garden participated in the night's unhurried pace, offering a rhythm that mirrored the quiet movement of the wandering figures. Figures passing through these areas moved without purpose beyond the simple act of being. Steps were measured and soft, following paths familiar yet never exact, as though the night itself guided them along a gentle current. Hands occasionally brushed against the rough texture of a wall or the smooth surface of a stone bench, tracing surfaces without thought or intent. The moonlight traced each contour with a muted glow, highlighting edges without contrast and leaving spaces in soft shadow, creating an ever-shifting play of light that seemed to move in tandem with each step. Courtyards expanded into wider open spaces where grass and low hedges softened boundaries. Here, movement slowed further, guided more by habit than observation. Figures paused now and then to adjust clothing, rest lightly on a fence, or lean over a railing, their gestures small and deliberate. Nothing was hurried, nothing abrupt. The spaces themselves absorbed these motions into their quiet architecture, merging human presence with the calm flow of the night. Every sound, from a soft step on gravel to a leaf brushing another, became part of the larger stillness, noticeable yet gentle, part of the night's continuous breathing. The interplay of light and shadow remained subtle but persistent. Moonlight filtered through lattices, trellises, and over low walls, spilling onto garden paths in pale, shifting rectangles. Candlelight from nearby houses reached out occasionally, diffused by glass or partially drawn curtains, lending warmth without disrupting the ambient calm. Each wandering figure became part of this subdued dance, their outlines stretching and shrinking alongside the natural shapes of the garden, merging with the nocturnal environment in seamless quietude. Even in these outdoor spaces, the patterns of habit persisted. Steps were repeated, gestures familiar, movements guided by repetition rather than thought. A hand might trail along a hedge, fingertips brushing leaves, or linger briefly on a stone edge, tracing it with an unhurried awareness. The air carried the faint warmth of the day and the cooler touch of night in tandem, a soft balance that echoed in the measured rhythm of each motion. The mind, if attending at all, could easily drift, following the gentle cadence of movement as it unfolded without expectation. Fountains and shallow basins contributed their subtle presence to this rhythm. Water, stirred occasionally by wind or by a passing hand, reflected the muted glow of moon and distant lanterns. Ripples spread outward slowly, catching highlights before fading into stillness again. The sounds were never pronounced, only suggested, carrying faintly through the open air, emphasizing the stillness that had settled over the gardens. The figures moving past these features did so with gentle care, touching lightly or pausing briefly, yet never altering the unbroken flow of calm. The architecture of the spaces continued to guide motion without command. Low walls, hedges, and stone pathways marked boundaries softly, offering subtle cues rather than strict restrictions. Steps slowed or quickened in response to the environment, not in reaction to urgency, but in natural, unhurried alignment with surrounding light, texture, and scent. Moonlight highlighted surfaces in ways that suggested direction without insistence, while shadows provided a constant companion, moving in quiet tandem with each wandering figure. Even wider open areas retained the same gentle continuity. Grass, hedges, and scattered stonework softened transitions, allowing movement to flow from one space to another. Figures passed under trees whose branches swayed softly, leaves whispering faintly as air currents shifted. The ground offered gentle resistance or smooth paths, each step measured without intent, forming part of the night's unbroken rhythm. Every element, air, earth, water, and stone, participated without demanding notice, creating a shared environment of calm observation. Subtle changes occurred over time, barely perceptible yet enough to mark the passing hours. Shadows shifted with the rising moon, light softened as clouds drifted across the sky, and the temperature of the air adjusted imperceptibly. Figures continued to move, sometimes pausing, sometimes altering direction slightly, yet always within the same gentle rhythm. The night absorbed every motion, every faint sound, every touch, holding it in balance with its pervasive calm. The continuity of the night extended beyond the immediate spaces of gardens and courtyards. Paths led outward to adjacent streets or open fields, where movement was quieter still, gestures smaller, steps measured in harmony with the surrounding environment. The night seemed to widen as these transitions occurred, encompassing more and more of the world without urgency or emphasis. Motion and stillness remained entwined, creating a delicate continuum in which presence was recognized but never spotlighted, where the flow of bodies merged entirely with the flow of time. Even the smallest gestures contributed to the unbroken rhythm. Hands brushing over leaves or stone, feet adjusting to uneven ground, eyes resting on shapes of light and shadow. All these minor acts were part of the night's gentle choreography. The environment responded subtly. Leaves shifted, water rippled, air moved just enough to acknowledge passing forms. Nothing disrupted the calm, and nothing called attention to itself, allowing wandering to continue naturally, seamlessly, without thought or expectation. As the night moved onward, the distinction between indoor and outdoor spaces softened further. Rooms and courtyards, gardens and pathways, all shared the same slow cadence. Human movement and natural presence intertwined in a quiet, immersive rhythm. Steps traced familiar patterns yet felt novel under the shifting light. Gestures repeated yet absorbed into the broader stillness of the night. The air, the surfaces, the scents, the faint sounds, all were part of an unbroken current of calm that carried slowly forward. The night had deepened further, and the paths that once led through gardens and courtyards now extended toward quieter, more open spaces. Here, the familiar rhythm of movement persisted, but with a gentler pace, as though the night itself had slowed in recognition of the hour. The moon hung low, its pale light spilling across wide expanses of grass, over stone borders, and along gently undulating terrain. Each step that fell upon the soft earth carried a muted echo, blending with the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional distant call of night birds, creating a continuous pattern of subtle sound that required no attention, yet invited presence. Figures wandering through these open areas moved as though guided by habit rather than intent. Each step was considered, neither hurried nor hesitant, a reflection of the soft cadence the night had woven around them. The air was cooler here, carrying scents of damp soil, distant flowers, and the faint tang of stone heated by the lingering warmth of day. Breathing in this calm environment, the body seemed to find its own rhythm, moving in harmony with the unspoken flow of the surroundings. Each footfall fell into place naturally, aligning with shadows stretching from low walls, hedges, and distant trees. Trees and low shrubs punctuated the open spaces, their silhouettes forming gentle patterns against the deepening sky. Branches swayed with a subtle wind, brushing against one another in a barely audible conversation that echoed faintly through the night. The leaves glimmered softly where the moonlight struck, revealing textures that might have gone unnoticed in the brightness of day. Faint paths traced themselves through these areas, worn by habit rather than design, their edges softened by grass, moss, and creeping roots, guiding movement without demanding attention. Figures paused occasionally at these natural intersections, leaning lightly against a tree, tracing a hand along a hedge, or resting briefly on a low stone. These pauses were quiet gestures, absorbed into the stillness around them. The shapes and textures of the surroundings invited these small moments, offering tactile reassurance, a connection between body and environment that required no thought. Light from the moon shifted gently across surfaces, highlighting edges in a muted glow, while shadows lengthened and shortened in perfect accord with the motion of the night. Water, when it appeared in this part of the landscape, was soft and unobtrusive. A narrow stream glimmered under the moonlight, flowing slowly over smooth stones, creating faint ripples that mirrored the subtle undulations of the land. Fountains in distant courtyards provided gentle, intermittent sounds, each splash absorbed into the greater quiet, reinforcing the feeling of continuity across both near and far spaces. Every droplet, every movement, was part of the same rhythm, adding layers to the night's pervasive calm. The transition from cultivated paths to wilder terrain was seamless. Grass and low vegetation absorbed the steps of wandering figures, offering a quiet resistance that felt familiar and comforting. Stones and roots marked gentle obstacles, guiding motion without imposing constraints. The night extended its patience over these spaces, allowing each movement to unfold in its own time. Light, shadow, and scent combined with touch and sound to form a sensory environment that encouraged gradual immersion. A continuous flow that neither demanded attention nor demanded action. As the moon climbed higher, its light became softer and more diffuse, tracing delicate outlines over the rolling terrain. Shadows moved in concert with subtle changes in the landscape, stretching across gentle rises, pooling in shallow depressions, and shifting along faint pathways. The figures that wandered among these spaces seemed to become one with their surroundings, their steps flowing naturally in line with the contours of land, the patterns of shadows, and the quiet pulse of ambient sound. Each gesture, each small adjustment of posture, merged into the environment, unobserved yet fully present. Even distant elements contributed to the night's seamless rhythm. Walls, low fences, and scattered structures stood quietly in the pale light, their surfaces smooth or textured, absorbing warmth from the fading day and releasing it slowly into the cool air. Every movement near them, hands resting briefly on stone, steps adjusting to slight inclines, faint brushing of garments against edges, was woven into the ambient calm. The world expanded gently around the wanderers, integrating interior spaces, courtyards, gardens, and open fields into one continuous flow of nocturnal stillness. The air, shifting subtly, carried the combined sense of soil, grass, and foliage, sometimes punctuated by the distant aroma of faintly burning wood or the delicate fragrance of night-blooming flowers. Each inhalation became part of the rhythm, a quiet reflection of presence within the vast calm. Wind currents, soft and unpredictable, traced across the terrain, bending leaves, stirring grasses, and brushing against figures without disturbance. These movements were absorbed into the environment, forming a continuous dialogue between the night and those who wandered through it. Faint traces of past activity lingered, though they were almost imperceptible. Slight indentations in the ground, the curve of a worn path, or the subtle smoothing of stone edges suggested previous passage, but these remnants held no weight or urgency. Instead, they contributed to the quiet continuity of the night, providing markers that blended seamlessly with current movement. The sensation of time passing was unhurried, measured only by the shifting patterns of light, the gradual cooling of air, and the gentle persistence of motion across spaces. The figures themselves, while present, seemed more like extensions of the night than distinct entities. Steps fell lightly, gestures were minimal, and pauses were absorbed fully into the environment. Movement and stillness coexisted, each enhancing the other, and the boundaries between body and landscape became almost imperceptible. The interplay of textures, soft earth, smooth stone, rough bark, and the gentle sway of leaves, offered continuous sensory engagement without alerting the mind, allowing attention to drift freely along the flow of quiet motion. Even as the wandering bodies continued their subtle exploration, the night maintained its unbroken cadence. Trees, water, stone, and vegetation all participated in the overarching rhythm, creating an interconnected framework in which presence could be noticed without insistence. Light and shadow shifted gradually, tracing forms across ground and surface, shaping perception while remaining unobtrusive. Every sound, whether faint or distant, was absorbed into the larger atmosphere of calm, reinforcing the unhurried pace that allowed sleep to approach gently, unforced. The night stretched outward, seamlessly connecting cultivated areas, gardens, open fields, and distant boundaries. Each space maintained the same gentle, unbroken rhythm, offering a consistent environment for movement and observation. Gestures, steps, and pauses continued to flow naturally, integrated with the ambient textures of light, shadow, air, and earth. The wandering figures, moving without direction or goal, mirrored the stillness that surrounded them, creating a harmonious cycle of presence and quiet that extended across the night. The subtle rhythm of the night continued to guide every movement, as wandering figures gradually approached areas where cultivated paths softened into more secluded spaces. Here, the garden and the wild intertwined, with carefully tended hedges giving way to gentle overgrowth and clusters of low shrubs. The distinction between structured and natural areas was softened by shadow and light, each element folding into the next without abruptness. Moonlight filtered through distant trees, casting delicate, shifting patterns over stones, grass, and patches of exposed earth. The air carried a faint dampness, mingled with the lingering scent of flowers and the subtle aroma of soil, creating a quiet, immersive atmosphere that enveloped all movement without pressure or urgency. Figures continued their slow, deliberate wandering, moving in ways that mirrored the soft cadence of the night itself. Steps fell lightly, their sounds absorbed by moss and grass, while hands occasionally traced the texture of bark or brushed gently against low stone walls. Pauses occurred naturally, not prompted by thought but by the unhurried rhythm of being. These moments of stillness were part of the night's continuity, allowing the mind to drift while the body remained engaged in quiet motion. Moonlight highlighted contours with a soft, steady glow, while shadows lengthened, softened, and merged with the surrounding darkness, creating a landscape of gentle contrasts that required no scrutiny. Water, when present, contributed to this extended sense of calm. A narrow stream, hidden beneath low, overhanging branches, reflected fragments of light, each ripple slow and measured. Occasionally, a small stone or fallen leaf shifted in the current, creating faint disturbances that quickly dissolved into stillness. The sound of flowing water was delicate and understated, blending seamlessly with the rustle of leaves, the gentle swaying of trees, and the faint echo of footsteps along winding paths. The environment seemed to absorb and incorporate every motion, forming a quiet, layered symphony of movement, sound, and light. The textures of the natural landscape were amplified by proximity and subtle observation. Grass yielded softly underfoot, while patches of moss provided gentle cushioning on shaded stones. Low shrubs and undergrowth brushed lightly against passing bodies, their forms pliant yet present, offering tactile feedback without demand. The contours of the land shifted gradually, small rises and depressions creating natural variations in pace and posture. Figures adapted instinctively, their movements harmonizing with the undulations of the terrain and the ambient sounds of the night. Every gesture, from the tilt of a head to the sweep of a hand across leaves, was incorporated into the larger rhythm, absorbed seamlessly into the environment. Light and shadow continued to interact in quiet complexity. The moon traced arcs across open spaces, casting elongated shapes that shifted imperceptibly with its rise. Shadows of trees, shrubs, and low walls stretched, merged, and retreated, creating a dynamic but calm interplay that guided perception without assertion. Candlelight from distant houses occasionally offered a warm, diffuse glow, blending with the silvery moonlight to create muted layers of illumination. Each wandering figure became part of this play, their movements traced softly by shifting light and shadow, their presence integrated into the ambient calm rather than drawing attention. The air was alive with subtle motion. Gentle breezes traced across open fields and wooded patches, bending grass, stirring leaves, and carrying faint scents from distant gardens. Moisture from dew and soft soil mingled with floral fragrances, producing an environment that was sensory-rich yet never demanding. Figures moved through this space almost unconsciously, adjusting steps and gestures in response to tactile cues, following paths that seemed to suggest themselves rather than being dictated. Movement was continuous but unhurried, a quiet dialogue between body and environment. Natural boundaries guided wandering without restriction. Low hedges, gentle rises, and scattered stones formed soft barriers, shaping motion with suggestion rather than imposition. Hands occasionally trailed over the surfaces of bark, stone, or foliage, providing quiet contact that reinforced a sense of connection with the surroundings. Every adjustment, pause, or step was incorporated into the larger cadence, allowing both movement and stillness to coexist in a state of gentle harmony. The transition from garden to more open, semi-wild areas was seamless, each space extending the unbroken flow of night without distinction or disruption. Fountains and water features, scattered among the quieter expanses, offered intermittent textures to the soundscape. Small splashes of water, the soft trickle along worn basins, and the occasional gentle ripple in shallow ponds all contributed to a layered auditory environment. None of these sounds were dominant. Each was absorbed into the broader quiet, reinforcing the continuity of space and movement. Figures passed these features with minimal notice, their steps and gestures maintaining a natural rhythm, fully integrated with the surrounding calm. The open areas themselves extended across gentle rises and dips in the land, creating visual and tactile variation without abruptness. Grass, moss, and scattered stone absorbed steps and guided motion, while low clusters of shrubs and occasional tree trunks provided points of reference without imposing structure. Figures moved with instinctive awareness, adjusting their steps to accommodate surfaces and contours. The interplay of touch, movement, and environmental texture reinforced the seamless connection between body and night, sustaining the continuous rhythm that had extended from courtyards and garden paths outward. Even as time stretched onward, the night maintained its unbroken cadence. Subtle shifts in light, slight movement of air, and the gentle progression of shadows marked the passage of hours without urgency. Figures continued to wander, pausing occasionally, adjusting gestures, or resting lightly on stones, all absorbed into the quiet rhythm that bound together movement, environment, and atmosphere. Every sound, texture, and scent became part of the larger continuum, inviting observation without insistence, encouraging relaxation and gradual drifting toward rest. The night's expanse seemed limitless, integrating cultivated gardens, transitional spaces, and wilder open areas into a single, coherent environment. Movement flowed naturally between these areas, guided by habit, touch, and the subtle interplay of light, shadow, and air. Each figure became an extension of the night's calm, their presence acknowledged by the environment yet never spotlighted. Motion and stillness intertwined in a quiet, immersive dance, allowing consciousness to drift freely, unpressured by time or direction. Even the smallest details were meaningful only in their contribution to overall calm. The sway of a branch, the faint ripple of water, the soft brush of moss against a hand, or the gentle adjustment of a footstep, all participated in the shared rhythm, each element incorporated seamlessly. The night's continuity was maintained without intervention, providing an unbroken thread of gentle motion and stillness that extended outward indefinitely. The night had grown even deeper, and the spaces that the wandering figures now entered carried a more hushed and contemplative quality. Open fields gave way to gentle clusters of trees, their trunks slender and their branches interlacing overhead, forming a natural canopy that filtered the pale moonlight into soft, mottled patterns on the ground below. Shadows shifted slowly, tracing the uneven terrain in long, muted lines that flowed across low mounds of grass and patches of soft earth. The wind, gentle and intermittent, carried the faint scent of damp soil and flowering plants, weaving through leaves and rustling softly over fallen branches, adding a subtle rhythm to the quiet movement that had persisted throughout the night. Figures continued their wandering in measured, unhurried steps, guided by instinct and the tactile sense of the ground beneath them. Each footfall was absorbed by moss and grass, creating a faint, almost imperceptible sound that blended with the whispering foliage. Occasionally, a hand brushed against the rough bark of a tree or trailed along the soft surface of a hedge, small gestures that connected body to environment without demanding attention. Pauses came naturally, unprompted, as the night itself seemed to encourage gentle moments of reflection and slow awareness. Moonlight illuminated contours with a steady, calming glow, while shadows shifted imperceptibly, enhancing the sense of continuity and seamless motion through the space. Small water features appeared intermittently, barely noticeable yet adding to the ambient texture of the night. A shallow stream, bordered by smooth stones and low vegetation, traced a winding path through the trees. Its surface glimmered faintly where moonlight caught the ripples, each disturbance subtle and transient. The faint trickle of water mixed with the gentle rustling of leaves, forming a quiet symphony that required no active listening, but encouraged presence within the environment. Figures passed near these streams with unhurried care, their gestures and steps integrating naturally with the continuous flow of the night. The landscape was a tapestry of textures and forms, each contributing to the calming rhythm of movement. Grass and moss softened the ground, providing quiet cushioning beneath each step, while occasional roots and stones offered minor adjustments that guided posture and pace. Low shrubs and undergrowth brushed lightly against passing figures, offering tactile cues that reinforced a sense of connection to the environment. The subtle interplay of touch, movement, and ambient sound created a seamless immersion, where each gesture became part of the night's gentle, unbroken cadence. Light and shadow continued their quiet dance, shifting imperceptibly as the moon moved across the sky. Trees and shrubs cast delicate, interlaced patterns, while the spaces between formed soft voids of darkness that deepened the sense of stillness. Distant candlelight from scattered dwellings offered warmth without contrast, blending into the silvery glow and reinforcing the ambient calm. Every figure moved as though part of this interplay, their outlines traced gently by changing light, their motions absorbed into the quiet rhythm rather than standing out against it. The natural architecture of the landscape guided wandering without restriction. Gentle rises, low mounds, and scattered trees suggested pathways, while subtle shifts in texture and light provided orientation without demanding attention. Hands might brush a low branch or rest lightly on a smooth stone. Steps adjusted instinctively to slight dips or inclines, and pauses occurred organically, all forming a continuous dialogue between body and environment. The flow of movement remained consistent, uninterrupted, and entirely in harmony with the surrounding calm. Air currents, soft and irregular, added another layer to the sensory experience. They carried faint, shifting scents of foliage, damp earth, and distant blooms, blending seamlessly into the quiet of the night. Grass and leaves swayed gently, and figures responded in minor, unconscious adjustments. Slightly shifting steps, a subtle tilt of the body, the light brush of a hand, each movement integrated into the pervasive sense of stillness and flow. The environment absorbed every action without resistance, maintaining a continuous balance between presence and calm, motion and stillness. Occasional glimpses of distant structures appeared through the trees, their outlines softened by moonlight and shadow. Low walls, stone posts, and rooflines hinted at human presence without interrupting the night's natural flow. Steps and gestures carried lightly near these features, sometimes tracing their surfaces with fingertips, sometimes passing without notice, but always in harmony with the environment's rhythm. The boundaries between cultivated spaces, open fields, and secluded groves became fluid, forming an uninterrupted network of quiet motion that invited gentle wandering without expectation. Small variations in light, texture, and sound marked the passage of hours. Shadows lengthened and shortened, water ripples shifted, and faint changes in air temperature moved subtly across the terrain. Figures adjusted their steps and gestures accordingly, yet no urgency or tension arose. Every element, the sway of branches, the soft crunch of moss, the distant whisper of water, was incorporated into a seamless, continuous experience, creating a layered and immersive environment in which the mind could drift freely. The night's expanse now felt boundless, with cultivated spaces, open fields, and shaded groves merging into one coherent landscape. Movement flowed naturally between these areas, guided by instinct, environment, and the subtle cues of light, shadow, and texture. Figures became extensions of the night's calm, their presence noted by the surroundings but never emphasized. Motion and stillness intertwined in a continuous, gentle rhythm, sustaining an unbroken flow of quiet that encouraged rest, reflection, and slow drifting towards sleep. Even the smallest details, the brush of leaves against hands, the ripple of water across a stone, the faint scent of night blooms, the gentle yielding of moss beneath a footstep, contributed to the pervasive tranquility. Each element participated in the overall cadence, incorporated seamlessly into the quiet continuum of night. The environment remained patient and unhurried, allowing wandering and observation to unfold naturally, without pressure, creating a gentle current of motion and stillness that extended without end. As the night stretched toward its final hours, the wandering figures moved into spaces where the boundaries between garden, grove, and open field softened even further, becoming almost imperceptible. Low hills rolled gently into wider expanses, their contours softened by moss, grass, and the occasional scattering of wildflowers whose muted colors were barely discernible under the gentle moonlight. The air had grown cooler and more still, carrying the faint scent of earth, foliage, and distant blossoms, blending together into a calm, enveloping atmosphere. Each step seemed lighter here, as if the land itself absorbed movement, welcoming the quiet presence of those who traversed it without urgency or direction. Figures continued their slow wandering, their motions harmonizing with the subtle rhythms of the night. Steps were careful but unself-conscious, each footfall absorbed by the soft ground beneath them. Hands occasionally brushed along low branches or trailed gently over the textured surfaces of stones, reinforcing a quiet connection to the environment. Pauses occurred naturally, as bodies adjusted instinctively to gentle rises and dips in the terrain, or simply lingered for the sake of the stillness itself. Light shifted delicately across the landscape, with the moon casting faint silver patterns on grass, leaves, and stone, while shadows merged into one another, creating a soft, undulating tapestry of shapes that carried no weight, only presence. Small water features appeared intermittently, contributing their subtle voices to the quiet chorus of the night. A shallow pond reflected the silver light with calm ripples, occasionally disturbed by a breeze or a drifting leaf. A narrow stream traced a serpentine path through the landscape, its soft murmurs integrating seamlessly into the ambient soundscape. Figures passed these features with minimal disturbance, moving gently along their edges, hands brushing lightly against reeds or stones. The interaction between movement and environment was seamless, each gesture absorbed into the broader rhythm, reinforcing the continuous, meditative flow of the night. The textures of the natural world deepened the sense of calm. Soft moss and grass cushioned every step, while low shrubs offered tactile engagement without resistance. Stones, worn smooth by the passage of time, provided points of gentle contact, encouraging subtle pauses and unhurried gestures. Trees stretched upward, their branches swaying lightly with the occasional whisper of wind, creating a soft, rustling accompaniment to movement. Each element of the landscape contributed to an overarching harmony, where body, environment, and night existed in a quiet, interwoven dance. Light and shadow continued their understated dialogue. Moonlight traced arcs across the open spaces, illuminating patches of grass, stone, and foliage with a gentle, diffused glow. Shadows lengthened and softened, flowing around hills, trees, and shrubs in a continuous, imperceptible rhythm. Occasionally, the distant glow of a candle from a small dwelling or watchtower added warmth to the silvered landscape, blending seamlessly into the ambient illumination. Figures moved within these layers of light and dark, their forms softly traced but never highlighted, fully integrated into the gentle rhythm of the night. The air carried a quiet dynamism, though it remained soft and unobtrusive. Gentle currents rustled leaves, brushed grasses, and shifted the fragrance of damp earth and flowering plants. Figures adjusted their steps and posture in response to these subtle cues, moving naturally with the flow of wind, light, and shadow. Even the smallest gestures, the tilt of a head, the brushing of a hand across a leaf, the careful placement of a foot, were absorbed into the ongoing cadence, unnoticed yet contributing to the seamless, unhurried continuity of motion and stillness. Spatial transitions were now almost imperceptible. Cultivated gardens gave way to open fields, which softened into groves and clusters of shrubs. Each change was gradual, a gentle folding of one environment into the next, without abruptness or attention-demanding contrast. Figures moved through these spaces as though guided by instinct alone, their presence harmonizing with the contours of the land, the textures underfoot, and the ever-shifting play of light and shadow. The night's rhythm persisted uninterrupted, carrying motion, sound, and sensory engagement forward with effortless continuity. Water and stone continued to provide subtle auditory and tactile variety. A small fountain murmured softly, while shallow streams whispered over worn pebbles and stones. These delicate sounds mingled with the rustling of leaves, the faint creak of branches, and the gentle swish of steps over moss and grass. The night soundscape was continuous yet never insistent, providing an unbroken sense of presence and movement that invited the wandering figures, and any listening observer, to drift with ease. The expanse of the night appeared limitless. Trees, shrubs, open fields, and gentle hills extended in quiet cohesion, forming an uninterrupted environment in which movement and stillness were one. Figures wandered slowly, adapting to every subtle rise, dip, and texture in the terrain. Their gestures remained minimal, absorbed fully into the surrounding calm. Every element, the sway of leaves, the faint ripple of water, the soft yielding of moss, the cool touch of air, participated in a continuous, gentle rhythm that encouraged gradual release and restfulness. Even the smallest details contributed to the pervasive sense of calm. A hand brushing lightly over stone, a foot sinking softly into moss, the glimmer of moonlight on a dew-dappled leaf. Each subtle interaction reinforced the quiet harmony of the environment. Time passed without urgency, measured only by the slow changes of light, the faint currents of air, and the gentle cadence of movement across the land. The night extended its embrace fully, providing a serene continuum in which wandering and observation flowed naturally, carrying the mind toward rest and the body toward stillness. The figures, now deeply integrated into the landscape, moved with a rhythm that was almost indistinguishable from the night itself. Each step, gesture, and pause contributed to an ongoing, unbroken cycle of gentle motion and quiet observation. The moon traced its course higher, casting long, soft shadows, while air currents stirred leaves and grasses in an endless, unhurried dialogue. Water, stone, foliage, and earth maintained their subtle voices, all merging into a single, continuous presence that required no attention yet offered full immersion. And as this final stretch of the night unfolded, the landscape itself seemed to sigh with contentment. Open fields, groves, hedges, and stones all flowed together, creating a seamless stage for the soft wanderings of those present. Motion and stillness were intertwined, sensation and observation overlapped, and the night carried every element forward in quiet perpetuity. The experience was gentle, continuous, and unending, allowing thoughts to drift freely, breaths to lengthen, and consciousness to soften gradually into rest. You don't need to keep listening anymore. The story can fade into the background now, becoming softer with every moment. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. There's no rush and nothing you need to remember. Just let your breathing slow down, let your thoughts drift where they want to go, and allow the quiet of this night to settle around you. This story will remain here gently playing while you rest. Tomorrow night, a new night will be waiting for you, and it's one you won't want to miss. And if sleep hasn't arrived just yet, you can quietly return to one of the previous nights, and let those stories guide you instead. For now, sleep well,